Right, we're live. Hi everyone, my name is Madeline and I'm joined today by Yousra. And I'm just so excited to be taking part in this discussion with her because we're going to be talking about mental health in YA literature. And I know this is a topic that's really important to both of us. And also next week, the 18th to the 24th of May is in fact Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK. So it's just a really good time for us to be talking about YA literature and mental health within it, because we're both YA writers. So this is a live video stream to YouTube, and if you're watching and want to ask a question at any point, all you need to do is leave a comment on the live chat facility for this video, and then we should be able to see it if I configured this all correctly, and then we'll be able to answer your questions live. So first of all, we'll introduce ourselves and our books. So Yousra, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Madeline. So hello, everyone. My name is Yousra Imran, and I am the author of my upcoming YA novel, Hijab and Red Lipstick, which is being published by #Press in October 2020, fingers crossed. My book is a novel that looks at the life of a teenage girl who's half English, half Egyptian. So it's a little bit based off me because I'm half English, half Egyptian, and how her life is turned upside down when her father moves her and her family from their happy life in London to the Arabian Gulf, and basically the culture shock that she goes through, living in a new society which has a completely different set of rules. It basically operates completely under a patriarchal system, and it's the tale of her fight for freedom and independence and her finding a voice within herself.
That sounds really great, and like ever since I heard about your book, I've been so excited to read it because like I've made a note in my diary of which day it's released because I'm just going to be like, yes, I need to read it like straight away. And yeah, like your book is about mental health as well, because I know that's how we got talking. So yeah, I myself write young adult dystopians and thrillers, and well, the thriller genre is the territory that I'm moving into and currently writing. So at the moment, all my published works so far are dystopians, and I've got 6 of these novels out. 4 of them make up my Untamed series, which is a dystopian series about addiction, betrayal, and survival. And the first book in that series released in the US in 2015 by Prism Books, and in the UK in 2017. And that was actually by my own imprint, which I set up to get these books back into print after Prism closed and rights reverted to me. So yeah, this series has actually got 2 different cover designs. You've got the US one and the UK one, which I just love talking about that because it's just like 2 different covers. And I always ask people like which is their favorite one because it's just a great talking point as well. So yeah, my series is set in a world where you've got 2 types of humans, the enhanced and the untamed. And the enhanced essentially the bad guys, and they aim to control all the untamed humans by getting them addicted to substances called augmenters. And these are basically chemical emotions. Because if the enhanced can control what the untamed are feeling, then like which emotions they're experiencing, they believe they can make the untamed people peaceful, so they're not a threat to their way of life. And because of this, feeling negative emotions is outlawed, and the enhanced ones, like particularly in the 3rd book, examine this from the perspective of their lifestyle being a cure for depression. So there is like this strong mental health theme running through this series. So like aside from looking at depression and addiction, 2 of the main characters also experience PTSD, and there's a brief examination of psychosis in the 3rd and 4th books as well. And like for me, I do think the dystopian genre is a great place to examine mental health, even if it's not the sort of overt message of a book, because well, my whole series is ultimately about this dystopian war and like a war of humanity. But of course, due to the great pressures placed on characters in such a situation, mental health issues do come up. Like I know for me, if I get stressed, my anxiety and OCD gets so much worse. So including mental health is just like a really natural and organic thing for me to do. And I do think we need to be sort of including mental health more in fiction, like especially YA fiction, because like we just need people to be able to sort of like see themselves in it and like see mental health as something that is normalized. So Yousra, why did you decide to write about mental health issues?
So, like you said, and by the way, I absolutely love dystopian novels and all dystopian series. It's my favorite genre. But like you said, it is really important to be writing about mental health issues in young adult or new adult fiction, because it really is the time in your life, those formative years where you go through so many emotions. And most teenagers do feel that they're sort of misunderstood by the adults around them. There's all these hormones raging while you're a teenager and even in your early 20s. And so, I mean, scientifically, I think there's also some science to prove that when you are a teenager and a young adult, you are sort of more susceptible to experiencing things like anxiety, suffering from panic attacks, and suffering from depression. It's not something that's just reserved to the older generation. You know, it's not just those people that are middle aged when they hit a midlife crisis that suffer from mental health issues. So for me, writing about mental health in my book as a book for young adults was really important, for first of all for that reason that I've just mentioned, but also as someone that comes from what's considered like a minority ethnic background. It was just really important to me that I spoke about mental health, because it's not a topic that is often talked about within our communities, within Arab and South Asian communities. It's still something that is viewed somewhat as a taboo, perhaps not so much now in 2020, but up until quite recently, it was a topic that you'd really, really rarely read about. So it's about sort of break that taboo and break stereotypes. And also, I think even for me, as someone that has personally had experiences with things like panic attacks and OCD and anxiety, as an author and as a writer, it actually was quite cathartic in the writing process, writing about mental health issues and how one experiences things like panic attacks or anxiety. So Madeline, you've talked about the sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, the addiction and the depression that your characters in the Untamed series experience. But do you want to share with everyone, you're currently writing a thriller series, aren't you? And mental health and mental health issues are sort of at the forefront of this new thriller series.
Yeah, definitely. So my thrillers are sort of written completely differently to my dystopian series. And mainly it's because in December 2018, I developed brain inflammation, which then caused severe OCD and psychosis. And that first month was very strange because I didn't know what was happening to me. And I turned to writing sort of as a way to try and explore and understand everything that was going on. And as I was writing, like I was still trying to write a dystopian book at that point, but I just found that I couldn't do it. But I just suddenly got this urge to write this really dark thriller. And like I just wrote it so quickly. Like I think I hashed out the first draft of it in about a month, which is just like so quickly for me. And then after that, I just found that I couldn't write prose anymore. Like even when I was trying to write another thriller, I just couldn't do it. And it's like my brain just wasn't sort of like capable of continuing to write. And like literally the day after I finished writing that draft, my brain inflammation worsened, and yeah, I just couldn't write at all. So it was a very scary time, and I was absolutely terrified of everything. And before this, I'd had like no indications of like OCD. Like I had sort of like minor anxiety, like as a teenager, but nothing sort of like to this extent. And I didn't know what was going on because doctors were just saying to me, "Oh, it's just like a mental illness, and we don't know why you suddenly developed it." Like because it was literally overnight in December 2018. But then I suddenly lost the ability to communicate verbally as well, and I also lost my sense of balance. I couldn't like walk anywhere because I just kept falling over. Like one time I even managed to fall into a ditch at the side of a road, much to the shock of my family who were with me, because like I was nowhere actually near the ditch at the time, but I just suddenly veered right off to the left and I just couldn't control where I was walking. So I felt very trapped in my own body because suddenly it wasn't working. And like my mind was just, I was just absolutely terrified of everything, and I found I couldn't write my stories, I couldn't talk to others, but I really needed to maintain my identity as a writer. So I started writing poetry, and it just happened really. Like, I'd never written poetry seriously before, because like the last time I did that was when I was at uni, and I wasn't really into poetry then. So yeah, I started writing this hugely dark poetry about what I was experiencing and everything that I was feeling. And these were, well, they were my therapy writings basically. So you've got my experiences of psychosis like in these poems, because I was hallucinating birds for like about 3/4 of the time when I had this brain inflammation severely. So I'd see birds around me when we weren't there. They'd be in my house. They'd be circling around me. I couldn't escape the birds, and I became absolutely terrified of the birds as well, because my OCD latched onto them. And I had contamination OCD, and I was just convinced that these birds were sort of like dropping sort of like badness all around me and just contaminating like every room, because I could just see them like everywhere. So birds became a prominent motif in these poems. Like many of the poems talk about their eyes or their wings. And yeah, a few months into sort of like the first stages of the recovery and initial treatment for the brain inflammation, I showed someone these therapy poems I'd written, and they were like quite amazed, because they said it gave them a good insight into sort of like what psychosis feels like and what OCD had been like for me. And so eventually I decided to release those poems as a collection, and it's called Captive, and it released in January this year. But yeah, back to the thrillers. It was when I was writing, when I began writing this prose again and found that I could do it, because like my brain had healed enough to sort of allow me to do that, and I could speak again by that point. And I just found that my writing style had changed, and then I only wanted to write thrillers now. And I went back to that first thriller draft I'd written at the beginning of my illness, and I edited that heavily, and mental health became like this really big part of the story. But I found, and like I did find it extremely cathartic writing it, but I also realised that I needed to do in my thriller what I had done in this poetry collection, because it needed to be more about my own personal experiences, because the poetry and that collection was just so important for me to write. And now I was just like desperate to sort of work on thrillers, but I needed it to sort of like have this this really important purpose to me, really. So I was like using my thriller writing to discover more and understand more about what I'd been through. So at that point, I then started the second thriller in like this sort of like new category of work I'm writing. And yeah, this new thriller is the one I'm just finishing work on now, and it's due to my agent next month, so I'm just like trying not to think about the deadline too much. But yeah, this one is an own voices story, and the main character has the same type of brain information that I have, and she experiences like the same OCD, psychosis, and panic attacks that I got with the brain information. So it's all based on my own experiences, and because I have a lot of gaps in my memory where I don't know what I've done, this makes my main character an unintentionally unreliable narrator, which I just found fascinating. Because the mental health aspect of the story isn't actually the main focus of the thriller, because it's all about the disappearance of the main character's sister before the book begins. But you've now got like my main character with psychosis and OCD and brain inflammation, and she's acting as the detective. And there's just so many things she can't remember, and others don't trust her in the book because of her mental health. So I'm really now using this thriller to explore the stigma attached to certain disorders. Like especially from my own experience, I found that as soon as I mentioned to others that I've experienced psychosis, I do get treated differently. I've had people become scared of me, and I think that is partly because traditionally in like popular culture, like books and like movies and stuff, psychosis is often used as a character trait for a villain, like to make them sort of more evil and show really how bad they are. So yeah, my thrillers are very much about sort of combating mental health stereotypes and like fighting the stigma that sort of like surrounds them. But they're also very therapeutic for me to write, and it's very sort of like connected to my own experiences. So yeah, they just seem completely different to my dystopian books. So yeah, anyway, you've told us like why you write about mental health, but I'd love to know a bit more about the mental health issues that you explore in your book.
So without giving too much away from the story, there are two characters within Hijab and Red Lipstick, one of them being the main character herself, who suffer from various mental health issues and who go through mental health crises as well. These include depression, anxiety and panic attacks, and then also there is some self-harm as well in the story. And very similar to you, Madeline, some of what happens in the novel is based on personal experience. And I just think that for someone that has been through it themselves, it usually lends to a more sort of positive representation in fiction, just because you're able to really portray those raw emotions and those raw feelings, having gone through it all and understanding it yourself. But I don't think that means, though, if a writer hasn't experienced mental health issues, that they can't write about mental health themselves. I think it's just like you were saying about the psychosis. I totally agree. There is traditionally a very sort of negative portrayal of psychosis in fiction and in TV and in movies. And it's just so important now that you sort of move away from that and hear from writers that have actually experienced things like psychosis, so that they can give an accurate representation of these mental health conditions.
Yeah, definitely, because like when you've just got sort of like mental health represented in a really negative way, that does only build to the stigma, and it does prevent others from like sharing their experiences and seeking help as well, because if they just feel so ashamed. Because like I know when I was hallucinating, I didn't really know what was happening, but as soon as like a doctor labeled it as psychosis, I just felt like great shame about that, just because of like how others would react around me and how I perceived others would react. So yeah, because like there's just so many stereotypes surrounding mental health. So what are the differences between how society looks at young adults with mental health issues in Britain and how they do in the Middle East?
So in Britain, I feel that it's becoming a lot more normal to talk openly in society about mental health and mental health conditions. And that's even being extended now to teenagers and young adults. They are encouraged to talk, to speak to someone if they feel that they are struggling or they're feeling depressed, that they can come forward and talk to someone in a confidential and private space. As you can see within British society, there are so many different support services available, charities and organizations. When you go onto the internet, you come across all sorts of Facebook support groups and forums. So if you are a young adult or a teenager and you're going through something, there are people there to listen. There are people there that can help you. Whereas in the Middle East, and I talk about this also through the novel, the infrastructure and the support services are still not there to support people, and especially teenagers and young adults with mental health conditions. There's still, as I said earlier, a stigma and a taboo attached to having a mental health condition. Sometimes having a mental health condition can be confused with having a physical illness. Sometimes there's a sort of religious connotation attached to it, which is not a correct interpretation, where if you're suffering from something like a panic attack or psychosis or OCD, you're told that you're not a strong enough Muslim, that you're possessed by some sort of demon, that you need to be exorcised, when really it is a mental health condition. And if the person saw a proper psychologist or psychiatrist, they would be properly diagnosed with OCD or with a panic attack disorder. Also, something that I experienced personally growing up in the Middle East was as a teenager, whenever you go to your GP and you tell them, I think I'm suffering from depression, the GPs there in the Middle East, they sort of don't really have the psychology to know how to react or to talk properly to a young adult or to a teenager. They tend to say daft things that, oh, you're so pretty, why would you be suffering from depression? And you're like, okay, well, what I look like has got nothing to do with how I feel. Like, if you consider me like attractive or pretty, that does, pretty people don't have like lead some sort of perfect life and never suffer from depression or from mental health issues. So I just feel that attitudes towards mental health are improving. In the last few years, they have been improving in the Gulf and in the Middle East, but there's still quite a long way to go.
Yeah. So what about the challenges of like medications and their side effects and dangers? Because I know in your book, the main character is prescribed an antidepressant in the Middle East that is banned for young people in the UK and America.
Yeah, so I explore that angle as well about sort of mental health medications for things like depression, anxiety, and OCD, and the sort of lack of awareness of the side effects. And I don't think this is something that's just restricted to the Middle East, because I know that I've seen it here in the UK as well, where GPs or psychiatrists, they will prescribe you an antidepressant or a benzo or antipsychotic without really warning you about the potential side effects. And especially as a young adult or as a teenager, the side effects sometimes can be absolutely terrifying. They can be even worse than the condition you're already going through. And I just feel again that that's a topic that's not being talked about enough, not within fiction and not within even mainstream media. And I think it's something that we as writers, and especially writers that are passionate about mental health, we can raise awareness through our books, through our writing.
Yeah, definitely. Like one thing that I have sort of like, well, when I was prescribed antidepressants and antipsychotics for my psychosis and OCD, I knew one thing that I was really worried about was that it would like reduce my creativity, and I just kind of thought that like it would stop me feeling everything, and that just like made me so nervous about starting this medication that I did desperately need. And like I think that is something that I do definitely want to explore, like in sort of like a future book, sort of like looking at sort of like the assumptions and stereotypes of like mental health medication in that way, because some of these sort of assumptions can be really dangerous because they'll just stop people from trying these medications, and like these medications can be so important. So like that's definitely something that I want to explore in my own writing, and I also want to see that more in sort of like mental health representation in young adult literature. So is there anything else sort of like related to mental health that you want to see like explored more prominently in YA fiction?
I think when it comes to mental health and mental health conditions, in the last couple of years, I have seen more YA novels being released that give a more sort of accurate representation of mental health conditions. And I think there's a more fiction out there that covers a more sort of more of a wider variety. You may have noticed that perhaps in the last decade that a lot of books focus mainly on depression, whereas in the recent couple of years you've got books now that talk about self-harm, about suicidal thoughts, OCD, and panic attacks. There is a lot out there. I do feel that still, when you look at the market, when you look at books out there, I still do feel that there are still a lot more adult fiction or adult novels out there that touch on mental health, and I would still like to see more novels from young adult and new adult authors that also bring mental health to the forefront.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, which YA books would you recommend for like really good mental health representation?
So I recently read All the Things We Never Said by Yasmin Rahman, and that's a book that only came out a year ago, and I feel that she did a really good job of covering quite a wide variety of mental health issues and mental health concerns. And also within the novel there was quite a diverse range of characters. So I think she did a really good job. I would encourage anyone out there who loves reading or who is thinking about writing a book themselves that that touches upon mental health to give that book a read.
Okay, yeah, like I haven't read that yet, but yeah, I'll definitely look out for that one. Like I have been sort of like consciously trying to find more books, especially young adult books that do sort of like look at mental health and that do have like accurate representations that aren't harmful in any way. So recently I've read Clean by Juno Dawson, and that looks at addiction, and it's really sort of accurate and really powerful, and it was just such an amazing book. And as well, the voice, like the main character's voice in that book is just amazing. So I highly recommend that one. And also any books by Holly Bourne, because like she is just amazing for writing really good mental health rap. Like the first book I read from her was, I think it was Am I Normal Yet? And I don't know if you've read that, but that has a really good OCD representation. So
I've heard about it. I've heard good reviews about it.
yeah, it is just so good. And like one of the things that I liked in that book was it wasn't completely about her experiences with OCD. There was like a love story as well, and like it just showed sort of like how mental health isn't like this isolated thing, but it does affect so many different parts of one's life. So I really liked that.
I definitely agree with that. That while having a mental health condition it does affect your everyday life, and it can affect every aspect of your life and perhaps change it in some way. You, on one hand, we want to see that mental health representation in young adult and new adult fiction, but also you perhaps don't have to, the whole storyline doesn't have to be about the mental health condition or the mental health crisis. You also want to hear about, what's going on in the rest of their life, whether it's a romance or whether it's their like studies or their ambitions, whether they're embarking on an adventure. So that's why I like the idea of your thriller, that there's this sort of investigation into a mysterious disappearance happening while the protagonist at the same time is suffering from these mental health issues, from the brain inflammation and from the psychosis. And I do think when it comes to the fiction and the novels that are currently out there, I would be very interested in seeing more books that talk about psychosis and that talk about post traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, definitely. Because, yeah, like you were saying, that a lot of the sort of mental health representation that is out, particularly going back a few years ago, does mainly focus on depression. And obviously, there are just so many different mental health like disorders and different like illnesses. So yeah, we do need to like see more a wider range in YA fiction. I've also last year I came across quite a few books about eating disorders in YA fiction, and yeah, like one of them, Winter Girls, that's just like a really good examination of it. But I really liked how that one, it wasn't solely about an eating disorder. It was sort of like the main part of the plot was this main character's experiences with an eating disorder, but it also showed how eating disorders are often linked to depression and like suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, and it really sort of showed how a lot of mental illnesses do overlap in a way. And I think that's definitely something that I do want to see explored more, because like often when you do get a book that's about mental health, it'll usually just be about one specific type, and they sort of like don't really bring in any other illnesses in the same novel. And I think it's just really important because like most people with a mental illness will have more than one type, because there are often sort of like comorbidities associated with mental illness.
Madeline, what advice would you give to aspiring writers out there who would like to write a book where mental health issues feature in the story, and perhaps they haven't necessarily gone through a mental health condition themselves?
I would say that the main thing to do would be to research the mental illness and to speak to people that do have personal experience of it, because you don't want to be sort of getting into the situation where you're writing based on sort of like preconceived ideas that you have are quite likely to be linked to stereotypes, which could be sort of very harmful for representation. So I think just sort of like with illness, won't add as much research as possible, and I'd recommend like sensitivity readers as well, who have experience with this illness and can read for your like portrayal and representation of this illness, because like the last thing you want to do is put out a book where it is harmful to people with that condition, because that's only just going to increase the stigma. But yeah, in terms of writing like a main character with an illness that you don't have personal experience of, I would suggest in a way that you, if it's not
I think Madeline might have some internet connection issues, but I definitely agree with Madeline that a sensitivity reader is so important when you're writing about an issue that you might not have personally experienced yourself. So I would definitely recommend, if you are writing a book about a mental health issue, do give it to a friend or to someone you know who has gone through a mental health condition themselves, so that they can sort of read it and sense check it, and make sure that you're representing it in a way that is positive and that portrays it in an accurate light. I think Madeline might be having some internet connection issues, so hopefully she can reconnect and get back into the studio. But while she's trying to reconnect, I would give advice. Oh, you're back, Madeline.
Yeah, I'm back. My internet dropped out then.
I was just saying that if I was going to give advice at the moment to writers out there, to writers that also are experiencing a mental health condition, especially at the moment in the sort of current circumstances that we're going through during this lockdown and during a pandemic, I think pouring out your emotions and your feelings and what you're going through into your writing is so important. So I'm not putting pressure on anyone at all, because there is this sort of pressure at the moment I feel coming from certain social media channels on writers saying, oh, this is the perfect time to write a whole novel or a perfect time to write a whole book. So no, I wouldn't want to put pressure on anyone, because these are definitely challenging times and challenging circumstances. But if you are a writer and you are suffering from a mental health condition, or you're going through something at the moment, perhaps writing is something that you want to stick out and use as an outlet to sort of pour out your emotions. And it doesn't necessarily have to be prose. Like, as you said earlier, Madeline, when you were going through your period of brain inflammation, you found that the best outlet for your psychosis and for your OCD was poetry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think part of that was because there's a sort of like distance with poetry. Because like when I write prose, I'm quite involved in it. And even like with it being fiction, it does sort of like weigh quite heavily on me. And I do find that like my manuscripts for like fiction can get quite sort of like dense, and I just get really sort of like drawn into it. Whereas like writing poetry, it provided me with like distance, which I could then use to sort of like explore my psychosis in a more objective way. But also because like each of the poems is like only sort of like a page long, I could just like finish writing it and just step away without feeling that like I should still be writing more. So it was up to me like how many poems I wanted to write. And yeah, I found that really useful because like it just didn't put pressure on me in the same way. Because like when I'm writing a manuscript, like, and I've got like the plot all plotted out and I've got all these characters, I do feel like constantly that I should be writing it. So yeah, the poetry was just completely different, and it was just really helped me, and it was very therapeutic.
Yeah, so you don't always have to be writing to produce a book or a novel, but yeah, writing can be used as a therapy. So whether it's keeping a journal or writing down a poem, or even just writing down some random words on a piece of paper, I really do encourage everyone out there, not even just necessarily writers. And I particularly encourage young adults and teenagers at the moment to use writing as a form of therapy, if you are, experiencing or going through something at the moment, especially during the lockdown.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I do like about therapy writing is it's this safe place for you just to write exactly how you're feeling. And I definitely found there was no pressure on me to show it to anyone. Whereas like if I'm writing a manuscript, like my critique partners might be asking me what I'm working on, and then like my workshop group will be wanting to like assess it like for the next workshop where we will swap chapters. And if I'm writing a manuscript that is sort of like very much based on me, which I am at the moment, but that's sort of like I'm a bit removed from sort of those early stages of brain information. So when I was writing these therapy poems, it was just really comforting in a way to know that I could write whatever and I wouldn't be judged for it. And I was just writing it for me. So it just removing that pressure really helped as well.
So, Madeline, if anyone out there is interested in checking out your work and checking out your books, where can they go to?
Yeah, so pretty much all like these major retailers, like online. Well, I suppose it's mainly just online at the moment with the pandemic. They all have to like stock my books, and also I know like a lot of libraries now doing like ebook services. So that's like a great way to sort of like read fiction as well. So yeah, I've got my Untamed series, which is a 4-book series that is complete and finished. I've got another sort of dystopian trilogy, of which 2 books are out, and the 3rd book is one that I'm still writing. That's the Dangerous Ones trilogy, and then I've got my poetry collection called Captive, which is out as well. So yeah, what about you? When does your book release? Because it's quite soon, isn't it?
So it should be coming out, God willing, on October the 15th this year. And at the moment, you can actually already pre-order. So the publisher's name is #press. And if you go to #press.co.uk, you will find in their shop section, the book is already up there and available for pre-order. And if you follow me or want to follow me on social media, I'm doing a cover reveal this Monday with the publishers on both Instagram and Twitter. So if you follow Press on Twitter and Instagram, you will be able to see the cover on Monday.
Oh, that's so exciting. I can't wait to see your cover because I've been waiting quite a while to see it because yeah, like I find that that's sort of the moment when a book sort of like feels real to you as well as an author. So yeah, are you pleased with the cover?
I've had a sneak peek and I am super pleased and super excited. So I hope everyone else likes it as well when they see it on Monday.
That's great. And yeah, I'll definitely be watching out for that. So yeah, was there anything else that you sort of wanted to say in this little discussion about mental health?
Well, just coming back to what we said at the beginning, it is Mental Health Awareness Month this month, and then next week is Mental Health Awareness Week. So I would say now is a good time, a particular good time perhaps to go out there and do some research into books that are out there, particularly young adult and new adult fiction, and to take a look at books that focus or touch upon mental health issues, and to give them a read.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So yeah, like when my internet cut out, I'm not sure like how much of what I was saying actually got broadcast, but yeah, something that I just want to sort of like mention again is that if you're writing about a mental illness that you don't have any experience of, I would suggest that you don't make that the sole focus of the book that you're writing, because in a way it's not necessarily your story to tell, and a lot of publishers do sort of have limited space for these types of stories, unfortunately. So you wouldn't want to tread on like another author's toes and use up that space, because there could be an own voices author out there writing the same thing. So I just think you've got to be sort of mindful and don't sort of like claim someone else's story as your own. So like if you are, it's fun to write about it, but just sort of like don't write specifically about the experience of being mentally ill. So
yes, I think that's sound advice.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining me to have this discussion. It's been like really in depth, and yeah, and it's just so great to meet you as well.
Thank you so much, Madeline, and it's lovely to have finally met you, even though it is through a cyberspace.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that sort of like concludes our discussion. So thank you everyone for watching. And if you have any questions for either of us, you can just like leave them in the comments, and then we should be able to reply even after this live broadcast is over. And this video will stay up on YouTube, so you can link to it and watch it later as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.